Disturbing news from the global war on terror. This is SkyWatchTV News for September 23rd, 2015. I'm Derek Gilbert. The new graduates from the $500 million program intended to train 5,000 moderate rebels to fight the Islamic State and the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad betrayed the United States government about 5 minutes after crossing the border from Turkey into Syria Monday night. Multiple reports say that the 75 new trainees of Division 30 immediately surrendered and handed their weapons to al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, the Nusra Front. They promptly pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda. Division 30's commander, Anas Ibrahim Obaid, reportedly told the leaders of the Nusra Front that he tricked his American handlers because he needed weapons. The Nusra Front thus gets what is described as a very large amount of ammunition, machine guns, and about a dozen new pickup trucks. Over the weekend, the chief of staff of Division 30 in Turkey quit, saying that the training program was not serious, that there was a lack of trainees, fighters, and supplies, and that the process for vetting new soldiers was poor. Obviously. Last week, Army General Lloyd Austin, head of U.S. Central Command, told the Armed Services Committee of the United States Senate that the original group of Division 30 fighters who crossed into Syria last month, of that group, only 4 or 5 are still fighting. So for the record, this program that was supposed to yield 5,000 soldiers to fight against Bashar al-Assad has yielded 5 at a cost of $100 million per man. Even more disturbing, the New York Times reports this week that American soldiers in Afghanistan have claimed that for years they've been ordered to look the other way as warlords and tribal leaders who are our allies in the fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan engage in what is called boy play. And that is exactly what your imagination thinks it must be. Sexual abuse and rape of young boys, often occurring on American military bases. The father of Marine Lance Corporal Gregory Buckley Jr. told the Times that his son said he and his fellow Marines could hear the boys screaming at night, but they weren't allowed to do anything about it. Senior officers told them to look the other way because it's part of Afghan culture. Corporal Buckley was shot to death on his base in Helmand Province 3 years ago by a 17-year-old so-called T-boy, a domestic servant, sometimes used as a sex slave, who lived on the base with a local Afghan police commander. This commander, Sarwar Jan, had a reputation for corruption, support of the Taliban, and child abduction, and yet somehow was appointed police commander of an American military base. Soldiers are growing frustrated that not only is this practice tolerated by the military, that some have faced discipline and had their military careers ruined for standing up to the practice. In another case reported by the Times, a captain and a sergeant from a special forces unit beat up an Afghan militia commander for keeping a boy chained to his bed as a sex slave. The captain was relieved of his command and transferred out of Afghanistan. He's now out of the military. The Army is reportedly trying to forcibly retire the sergeant involved in the incident. Congressman Duncan Hunter, a Republican from California, is trying to convince the military, the Army, to reconsider. Colonel Bob McGinnis is a Pentagon strategist and an internationally recognized expert on domestic security and foreign affairs. He's teaching this week at the Army's War College in Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. I spoke with him this morning between classes. He told us that pedophilia is widespread in the Middle East, and that these reports indicate that political goals are outweighing considerations of right and wrong in the mission that our government has set before our military.
Yeah, unfortunately, the culture in the Middle East is radically different from what we're accustomed to. And the use of young children for the sexual pleasures of, men in some of these countries is fairly well known, well documented. And when we work with these people, it's something that becomes pretty evident. And when we try to do something about it, often the case has been that we're told to turn a blind eye to that. No, it's wrong, it's immoral, and yet it's something that is fairly well known amongst the people that have fought in those regions for a long time. So if people are being prosecuted for beating up someone for abusing a child, that's wrong as far as I'm concerned. But I'm not surprised that finally we have some young people that in our country that see that, this is morally unjustifiable and wrong, and it must be dealt with. And yet, commanders who are more sensitive and politically correct about what goes on in the dark recesses of tents that are scattered in places like Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or even Syria and so forth. But homosexual behavior is not something that's uncommon, and child pedestry is not something that's uncommon in that part of the world.
And another story, Colonel McGinnis, that we're disturbed by this morning is the news that the $500 million program of dedicated to training so-called moderate rebels in Syria, trained in Turkey and sending them into Syria, the Division 30 forces. The first group walked across the border into an ambush and was basically wiped out. General Lloyd Austin testified to Congress last week that only 4 or 5 of the original 50 were still fighting. Then comes word that the new group of 74 soldiers sent across the border earlier this week immediately handed their weapons over to the al-Nusra Front, a group linked to al-Qaeda, and then pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda, essentially. What does that say about American strategy and our goals in Syria?
Well, I think many of us have said from the very beginning the strategy is bankrupt. One, you can't win a counterinsurgency from the air, which has been Obama's plan. And secondly, Iraqi security forces, because they're so corrupt, have proven to be unreliable, as we've seen from Mosul to Ramadi to Fallujah and elsewhere. In Syria, you have a complex arena of Islamist groups. There may be well over 100 different groups, some of which are affiliated with one another. Al-Qaeda, its affiliate there is al-Nusra Front. And their allegiance is clearly to Al-Qaeda International, which, of course, is hidden in some cave in Afghanistan. For them to have people that they snuck into our training program, whether it's in Turkey, in this case, or in Jordan, or Bahrain, or elsewhere, is not surprising at all. It is incredibly difficult to vet these people. We've demonstrated that time and again. I would argue that this is a serious problem because we spent so much money. We've dedicated $500 million to training a few thousand, and at this point, it doesn't look like we're going to get anywhere close. But many of these same types of people that are unreliable that we say we're going to vet are now infiltrating into Western Europe. And, of course, they want to bring, this president wants to bring a couple 100,000 of those people to our own country. Our ability to vet people with little documentation from a region torn by civil war for years that are, on Islamic steroids is incredibly, if not impossible to do. And yet, we'll do what we can to satisfy the political masters in this country that really refuse to acknowledge the ground truth, and that is that this is a failed proposition from the very beginning. Now, that doesn't mean that all Syrians are bad. What it means is that our system of Western looking at Middle Eastern just doesn't work.
Did I hear you correctly that there's a potential that some of these troops may have taken American training and are now infiltrating with the refugees into Western Europe with an eye toward eventually getting into America?
Well, certainly ISIS has already said in a number of forums that they have every intention of sending people amongst those that are fleeing the Middle East into Western Europe to create chaos. Only a week ago in Stuttgart, Germany, an ISIS recruiter was arrested, and he had a suitcase full of Syrian passports. Now, he wasn't using that just to entertain the locals. He was going to give those passports to people that were undocumented to give them legitimacy, and probably he was going to give them to people that were sympathetic to ISIS. So we face a very serious threat. It's not something that this administration seems to be prepared to do, and yet even our own FBI director says that there's an investigation on ISIS in all 50 states. Why in the world, at this juncture, would we allow our government, Homeland Security, to bring in a couple 100,000 additional Syrian refugees, even though we care for the refugees, bring them into our shores and let them loose in our country, knowing full well that some of them are likely radicalized. There's plenty of proof of this, and just demographically, that's going to be the case. But yet, we certainly have some bad counsel and some bad decisions being made at the national level of this country.
Colonel Bob McGinnis is author of the forthcoming book, Never Submit, which will be available in October from Defender Publishing. The question for us Americans is, especially for us Christians, is what do we do about this? What policy do we support? Do we abandon the people of the Middle East to the savagery of the Islamic State and the Taliban when it appears that our allies in the fight against those groups are just as bad? Pray especially that our young men and women come home safely, because it appears that there is no good outcome in that part of the world. Elsewhere, the war in Syria has forced the first withdrawal from the global seed vault buried in the Arctic. The vault on Norway's Svalbard Island was built in 2008 to store seeds intended to preserve crops in the event of a global nuclear war, climate change, or some other global disaster. The International Center for Agricultural Research in Dry Areas, which was formerly headquartered in Aleppo, Syria, wants some of its samples back to replace seeds that were destroyed in the war. Benjamin Netanyahu and a group of Israeli military leaders traveled to the Kremlin Monday, Netanyahu meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss Russia's intentions in Syria. There were smiles and handshakes, but no question that there's some awkwardness there as well. The presence of Russian troops in Syria means, if nothing else, that Netanyahu no longer has a free hand to launch strikes in Syria to stop the flow of weapons from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in Israel, archaeologists believe they found the tomb of the Maccabees. The Antiquity Authority announced Monday that excavations are underway that appear to match accounts of the Maccabees' tomb. Now, the Maccabees are considered heroes by both Jews and Christians. They revolted against Greek rulers in the 2nd century BC who banned Jewish religious practices, and they are celebrated every year at Hanukkah. 2 million Muslims are in Saudi Arabia for the annual Hajj. This is the pilgrimage to Mecca. Islam requires that all able-bodied Muslims perform the Hajj once in a lifetime. This comes weeks after a huge crane in Mecca crashed into the Grand Mosque there, killing more than 100 and injuring hundreds more. And finally, the war on human exceptionalism continues. PETA, which apparently now stands for Profiting Every Trial Attorney, has filed a lawsuit on behalf of a macaque monkey named Naruto. Naruto, who lives in Indonesia, reportedly grabbed a photographer's camera back in 2011 and took a selfie. PETA claims that publishing this photo to the internet without the monkey's consent is a violation of Naruto's rights. PETA's general counsel, Jeffrey Kerr, says if the group prevails in its lawsuit, it'll be the first time a non-human animal, catch the verbiage there, non-human animal, as though we are all just animals, is declared the owner of property instead of being declared a piece of property itself. Now, beyond the frivolous nature of the lawsuit, for example, how does an Indonesian monkey have standing to file suit in a U.S. court? How does PETA prove that they know and are friends with Naruto? How do they know that Naruto is even the monkey's name in monkey language? And of course, then there's this from the U.S. Copyright Office, which explicitly states, believe it or not, that it will not copyright register photographs taken by a monkey. Beyond the silliness, this is a serious effort, and that's why we report on this from time to time. It is another attempt to get a court to issue a legal ruling recognizing that animals are persons under the law, an attempt to enshrine in law the concept of personhood, which is not, as some in the Occupy movement would have you believe, a corporation defined as a person for the purposes of the law. It is intended as a redefinition of human rights as civil rights or person rights. The concept of personhood would state that above a certain level of cognitive ability, any species, human, animal, or even artificial, can be considered a person under the law. Thus, there would be non-human persons, such as Naruto, but also non-person humans, such as those who suffer cognitive disability, people who've suffered head trauma, perhaps. This is denial of our status as God's imagers on earth, a denial of our unique role on earth as defined by God. Regardless of our gifts or challenges, human life is sacred because we have been created in His image as His moral agents on planet Earth, regardless of our gifts or challenges. SkyWatch TV returns next Tuesday to the Christian Television Network. Carl Gallup's back for another discussion of preparedness as National Preparedness Month continues. You'll see that at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 8:30 p.m. Central Time on the Christian Television Network, DirecTV, Channel 376, Dish Network, Channel 267, and the Glory Star Satellite Channel 117. And, of course, you can watch it streamed on the internet at the Christian Television Network's website, ctnonline.com. In October, it's an expert lineup at the Strategic Perspectives Conference, the 10th annual, at Koinonia Institute in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Tom Horn will be there, along with Gary Stearman. Some future guests on SkyWatch TV, such as Colonel Bob McGinnis, Joel Richardson, and others, such as Joseph Farah, the editor, publisher of WorldNet Daily, Bob Cornuke from the Base Institute, and others. You'll find out more about that, and you can register online at koinoniainstitute.org. And speaking of registration for the 2016 Rocky Mountain International Prophecy Conference begins in just a few weeks. Opens October 13th at prophecywatchers.com. The conference coming up July 15th through the 17th, 2016 in Colorado Springs. That is co-sponsored by Prophecy Watchers and SkyWatch TV. As I mentioned, September is National Preparedness Month, and as the month continues, we are still offering to you as our gift, for your gift of $25 or more, the Ultimate Women's and College Students Deluxe Safety Kit. Fathers, grandfathers, a special gift, an important gift for the women in your life, a self-protection book written for women, and a personal alarm system, including pepper spray, a rape whistle, and all of this packed in a rugged military design handbag. Again, our gift to you during the month of September for your gift of $25 or more. And you'll find information on where to give at skywatchtv.com. Quick program note, the next 2 days, a special guest in studio for our daily updates, including a special edition of Sci Friday with Dr. Chuck Missler. Don't miss it. Comments, questions, and suggestions are welcome. Please send those to me, dgilbert@skywatchtv.com. Thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV. Disturbing news from the global war on terror. This is SkyWatch TV News for September 23rd, 2015. I'm Derek Gilbert. The new graduates from the $500 million program intended to train 4 or 5 are still fighting. So for the record, this program that was supposed to yield 5,000 soldiers to fight against Bashar al-Assad has yielded 5 at a cost of $100 million per man. Even more disturbing, the New York Times reports this week that American soldiers in Afghanistan have claimed that 5,000 moderate rebels to fight the Islamic State and the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad betrayed the United States government about 5 minutes after crossing the border from Turkey into Syria Monday night. Multiple reports say that the 75 new trainees of Division 30 immediately surrendered and handed their weapons to al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, the Nusra Front. The program was not serious, that there was a lack of trainees, fighters, and supplies, and that the process for vetting new soldiers was poor, obviously. Last week, Army General Lloyd Austin, head of U.S. Central Command, told the Armed Services Committee of the United States Senate that the original group of Division 30 fighters who crossed into Syria last month, of that group, only promptly pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda. Division 30's commander, Anas Ibrahim Obaid, reportedly told the leaders of the Nusra Front that he tricked his American handlers because he needed weapons. The Nusra Front thus gets what is described as a very large amount of ammunition, machine guns, and about a dozen new pickup trucks. Over the weekend, the chief of staff of Division 30 in Turkey quit, saying that the training